Now, to tie this back into wrestling, obviously Hulk Hogan has shown incredible social ineptness here. He didn't know anybody would be hearing these comments, and we got a
Well, let
lot.
me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Well, let me just cut you off. These specific comments, the one where he was discussing about Brooke and stuff,
Right.
where were those comments from?
I believe the situation is that there are several sex tapes containing him and Bubba the Love Sponge's wife,
Mm-hmm.
and on one of the sex tapes, when this was a security system in Bubba's house that was filming his house. Part of the pillow talk,
Mm-hmm.
the post-coitus pillow talk, is he was talking about his daughter, and so that is on one of the sex tapes.
Oh, so that's what's from one. It's footage from the same footage that produces sex tapes.
Right? Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, that's. I mean, good grief. Come on. I mean, but bro, like I said, I put this tweet out the other day. Right. If you want to judge every human being on every word they have ever said, then look in the mirror and start with yourself. All right. I mean, there is obviously a lot of, hypocrisy here from the critics. You could bring up the "May he who is without sin cast the first stone" argument here, and everybody, 99% of the people that are jumping on the bandwagon, piling on Hulk Hogan right now would fall into that category.
Well,
I mean,
I think that if you're WWE, you had to fire him right away. And so I have no issue with him being fired. I have no issue with anybody being outraged.
let me tell you this.
Yeah.
What if Donald Trump was in charge of the WWE?
I don't think.
Vince McMahon's in charge of WWE. What if a guy like Donald Trump was in charge of the WWE? And Donald has basically he's been brutally honest in his campaign. Very very straightforward. What if he was the type of guy that is basically said, instead of just immediately punishing severely people, which is what we as society like to do when something like this happens, is judge harshly and strongly as soon as possible while the coals are still hot. What if Donald Trump had said, was in charge of WWE and said, hey, let's Hulk Hogan, he obviously said something he obviously said something was very insensitive, but let's forgive the guy, let's let him make amends and stuff, instead of all right, let's just erase Hulk Hogan and ruin his life.
Well, this is the modern equivalent of feeding Christians to the lions or burning the witches. We've always had this innate desire to see people killed off, and I do think when someone makes a mistake, and granted, this was ugly stuff he was saying. I don't think either one of us is defending what he said, but they're in this internet mob mentality. We don't get our satisfaction until the guy loses his job. And so WWE was smart and neutered that whole process by getting rid of him first. And so then the question becomes, am I shocked that an old man didn't want his daughter dating outside of their race? No, I'm not shocked. I'm sure there's plenty of old men out there that have what I consider to be these backwards views. But if you just fire him, that doesn't accomplish anything. Great, he's fired.
Oh.
But how about we have some sort of discussion here? Because there will come a time in 100 years where everybody's a gray bisexual, and they will look back on the idea of us segregating our species into subspecies. They will think that that's a ludicrous. But obviously, right now in 2015, a lot of people do feel this way.
Well, here's a very simple question to ask people. Okay, let's take a poll, a random poll of 35 to 55-year-old white males. Okay, and it's a private poll. You don't have to nobody has to know what your answer is, right? And there's two questions. Do you have a problem with your son or daughter being a friend of a black person, a black man, or a black girl? Okay, should check yes or no. And then secondly, this question number 2, do you have a problem with your son or your daughter dating a black male or a black female? And check yes or no in that box. And just look at the private answers on that. Probably 95% percent will say no problem to having black or white friends, but what percentage would say, yes, I do have a problem with them dating the opposite sex in a private poll? What percentage of white males ages 35 to 55 do you think could say that compared to – well, what would your percentages – what do you think the percentages be to those two questions?
I would think if you asked a parent in their 50s or 60s, do you have an issue with your daughter dating someone from another race, I think there would be still a very sizable portion of the society that has a problem with it. So really, what sinks in here is he took it.
But what about the other question?
In terms of them having friends,
Mm-hmm.
I would think the amount of people that would have an issue with them having friends would be very low.
Right. So that's really all this is.
Well, he used such extreme and hateful language, though. That really put it over the top.
But what he used extreme and hateful language. But what is extreme and hateful language? It's words that we have come up with, which we've deemed extreme and hateful. But really, if they're coming out of your mouth, do they really have the meaning of what they say? Like a Ku Klux Klan member using the N-word, as opposed to, would that have the same strength as a friend of yours using the N-word that is obviously probably not racist, but has used the word before? Would it mean the same coming out of either mouth?
Well, I mean, probably not, but still.
Probably not.
This is a difficult discussion for me to have because I feel it's so childish to say the N-word, but there's not really an alternative. So that's why I prefer to just say extreme and hateful language, because I feel like we're in kindergarten. It's like
we're talking about one, but that's the gist. We're talking about one word that's used,
and
it's a word that's used freely by black people when they talk to each other.
I don't buy into that thing though, because I think that's very different.
Here, let's be honest here. Hulk Hogan. So let's take the argument back to what it is. Hulk Hogan is a 62-year-old white male, okay, that probably just has the same basic prejudices that a 62-year-old white male would have if his daughter was dating a black person.
But there will come a time in the future where someone having those feelings would be extremely, extremely rare. We're just not at that point yet. And so what can we do?
Right. So what'll happen is that the feelings probably will never change, but whenever they're brought up, the echo chamber and the people piling on will talk about it. You know what I'm saying? It will always be a hot topic for discussion. Not to mention it's a hot topic for media discussion, because this is good for clicks and hits and views.
Well, that's what's going to be interesting too. Is we don't know. The Inquirer was very smart to just give us like a little nibble, because apparently there's a lot more said on these tapes that they're now going to kind of stretch out. So we might have like 10 weeks straight of every week there's more like incredibly outrageous Hulk Hogan comments being published. So are they going to build to a pay-per-view maybe? Like this thing could really snowball.
Who knows, man? I don't know, man. Like I said, my feelings of Hulk Hogan are pretty basic. He was a guy that, in WCW, very loyal, as loyal a friend as you will see, because he took care of his guys to for as far as I can remember, right?
To the detriment of the company, because a lot of time his guys weren't that great.
Maybe, but still,
Right.
Secondly, he was a guy that always used to talk about being a team player, but always had his own locker room. So I would I've always, to this day, I've always been critical of that. Okay, but thirdly, he wasn't a bad guy. I'm like, he wasn't like the type of guy that you just looked at him or just talked with him and they were came across as condescending or anything like that. So he wouldn't. There was really nothing wrong with the guy. He's the biggest star, arguably. He's on the Mount Rushmore of professional wrestling. Well, I mean, not even arguably. He's there, and so it's like from a personal standpoint, people that really, you won't find a lot of people that knew him well that are going to speak badly of him. You know,
And
Scott
I
Steiner may be the only guy that's like, you know, that's going to, you know, really blister him here and stuff. But most everybody that know him is going to really come to his defense in this case because basically, like I said, never a hint of racism. Like nothing, just was always cool to the black people, the black wrestlers, the black, you know, like black rappers. You know, love the guy, and he's always been cool with them and stuff. So it's like I just don't see anything. You know, I never saw anything like that from him.
Well, I always say that people don't evolve at the same speed, and so this idea of hopefully our culture will continue to become more evolved when it comes to being accepting of other people. I do think one of the last barriers will be old men being cool with their daughters ending up with the other race. That might be like at the end of our racial evolution. That day will come at some point, but it does go to show someone who would maybe normally not have any problem with other races, just how, you know, because the language that he used would obviously show that this was like a very emotional thing that he was upset about. I've never had a daughter, so I don't know if I would be upset or not if my daughter was dating somebody that was Asian. I don't know. Probably I would think not. I don't see why it'd be a big deal, but maybe for people, for some reason, for people from that generation, they are disgusted by this idea. For someone that grew up in the era that I grew up in, it's very hard for me to understand.
Yeah, you would think in this day and age it is, you know. So I mean, I don't know, bro. It's like,
black chicks are hot as fuck, so I don't. It's hard for me to think in those terms.
Right. So yeah, right, exactly. I don't know. I don't have a daughter. I have no, you know. I probably wouldn't have a problem. I tell you what, I probably wouldn't. I would have a problem with my daughter, regardless of race, color, you know, whatever, dating a lower class individual. You know, dating dating a thug of any type of color. You know what I'm saying? So maybe like that's, you know, if that was the case where like maybe Brooke Cruz was dating some rapper guy and there's a prejudice there that he thinks like, you know what I'm saying? So it's not, who knows? I don't know. I'm not in his head. But as I said, like from some personal standpoint, this was shocking to me. But then and not so maybe it wasn't shocking because God knows what anybody we know says behind closed doors in the privacy